Welcome to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. The podcast that covers all things about humans, technology, and particularly the bit in between.
And welcome to this episode of 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. This is being recorded on a day of big change in the world. And I think certainly here in the UK, we're waking up to new news in the States, which by the time you've got this, we'll probably understand the ramifications of and how we go. So slightly tired this morning after seeing the results sort of rolling in. Anyway, this episode is going back to this idea about looking at organizations that could be really great advocates for human factors involvement in different types of industries, and really wanted to learn more about them and engage with them a bit more. Our focus here is really about engaging with the people who know them organizations inside out and can tell us a bit more about how we can engage and how we can help in those areas. So today's organization is Space Wales. And there's no prizes for guessing what sector we're talking about here or really where it's going to be based. But regulars to this podcast will know I've got a real soft spot for all things space related. So I'm really looking forward to getting stuck into learning more about this. If I'm honest, human factors in the space domain is a real mixed bag. It's easy to look at NASA and think it's all okay. They've got loads of people looking at everything about how astronauts are engaged with and all the usability behind that. And if you listen to the episode where I interviewed some of the team from the Artemis project, you can nearly hear my jaw hit the ground when they share just how many human factor specialists they have. But I think it's fair to say that's the exception rather than the rule. It's a simple truth here in the UK that we are lacking in human factors engagement, both by companies themselves, the people who are developing these things, but also a lack of championing by the governments at all levels. That is where we as a discipline need to be pushing hard to raise the profile. And it's not really just about saying, hey, we want to be involved. It's more about there's an onus on us to really highlight the value of human factors in this field, especially when you consider, I guess, in the UK in particular, we're not really putting people into space off our own launches, though that is coming soon with any luck. It's about showing that even with satellites and things with payloads, that there is a human involvement there. You've got operators, you've got all the way through the build cycle. So we've got a job to do here to raise the value of human factors and prove to people that it's worth engaging with us. So getting back to the whole Space Wales piece, you might think this sounds awfully like Aerospace Wales, and recall the interview I did with Rachel Blackburn a few months ago. And you'd be right. They do work very closely together. But rather than me try and explain that relationship, I think it'd be better to hear directly from the organisation itself. And I'm really delighted to welcome the cluster manager of Space Wales, Rosie Cane. So Rosie, welcome and thank you for joining me on the podcast.
Hi, Barry. Thanks very much for having me.
So let's get down to it. You know, what do you do? What's your role and what do you do on that day-to-day basis as a cluster manager?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, cluster manager, you might ask, what is a cluster? So there are clusters for lots of different sectors across Wales, which is basically a group of different organisations working in different areas. So I work with the space cluster, and that's the space organisations, that's companies, that's universities, and the Welsh Government as well, to help to develop and grow the space sector in Wales. So we've got just over 2,000 employees in the space sector in Wales, and I want to help that to grow, help the number of organisations increase, and I do that by working together with them to help to deliver a space strategy for Wales, and help things to continue to flourish in the space side of things.
I mean, as jobs go, to be able to say that basically you're at that pinnacle of space in an entire country, that's pretty cool. How did you get why did you get involved in space in the first place? What inspired you to do so?
Yeah, I got into space when I was very young. So my dad used to take me outside when I was about 6 years old with a telescope on a clear night. This was in Birmingham, so didn't get them very often, but when you did, it was great. And grew up with shows like Sky at Night on the television as well. From that interest, enthusiasm about space, I went to university to do an undergraduate degree in astronomy, which was great because it was hands-on. So it was very much focused on the practical side of astronomy, going out and using a telescope, actually kind of learning the basics of planetary geology, galaxies, understanding astrophysics, but from a more kind of interactive perspective, which was great for me and the way that I learn. So that was a really great time when I was actually introduced to the topic of astrobiology, which is a tricky one to explain. Essentially, it's the search for life beyond Earth. So NASA has a definition that it's the origin, evolution, distribution, and future of life in the universe. And I was absolutely fascinated by that topic. So I did my undergraduate dissertation around that. At the same time, also doing some work on science education and science communication as well, which I was really happy to be able to combine the two together in a role at TechnoQuest Science Centre, working in the planetarium. And so I could tailor shows about the night sky around astrobiology. And then at that point, I applied for a PhD up at the University of Edinburgh to actually work in astrobiology, which I was successful in, which was fantastic. So I got to go and look at how different teeny tiny microorganisms like bacteria respond to some of the horrible conditions we know exist in the solar system on places like Mars. I say horrible in terms of for humans, so the high amount of radiation, the low temperatures, the toxic salts. It's stuff that humans wouldn't be able to survive, but there are microorganisms on the Earth that we know can survive those conditions that exist inside volcanoes, at the bottom of the ocean where there's no sunlight, where there's high pressures. So I was looking at those particular microorganisms and then how they survive, or how they could survive, I should say, in other planetary conditions by recreating those inside a lab at the university, which was brilliant to just merge biology and astronomy together to understand that a bit further. I then wrote up PhD thesis. It's strange to say that in such a short sentence because that was about a year of my life in terms of writing all of that up. But was really interested in the space industry side of things. And I was fortunate enough to get a internship through the UK Space Agency's Space Placements in Industry programme, looking at developing a launch education programme for students who are interested in the UK space sector. And so I spent some time researching that, engaging with universities and looking at where the need was for that and what kind of skills that students were looking to develop through learning about rocketry and actually getting to build their own rocket and going up to Scotland to launch that, which was super interesting. And then started to recognise all sorts of companies working in the space sector across the UK. So my role kind of pivoted towards business support and understanding where that exists in the space sector and how we can support through technical side of things, but also business engagement and funding opportunities. And then the opportunity arose to do that for Wales and in the space sector for Wales, help it to grow. And I jumped at that opportunity because I was already based in Wales. I was starting to learn about some of the things happening, and to be a part of that was absolutely fantastic as an opportunity. And that's how I got to where I am now.
That's really, I mean, there's not that many people I think can sort of say that, certainly that I've spoken to, that get inspired at such almost a young age and have been able to follow that almost and pull together all the things that excites them about what they're doing and enable them to push them forward. So that's really fascinating. So what we're going to do before we get into the main topic of Space Wales and how that works, we're going to have a go at resetting your camera.
Okay.
And then we'll take a quick break. So do you want to switch your camera off and back on again?
You are listening to 1202, the Human Factors podcast. We wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you for your support. You can help further by rating us through your podcast provider, sharing us through social media, and telling your friends and colleagues. Let's work together in raising awareness of the value in putting users at the center of what we do.
And welcome back, and we talked to Rosie Cane about Space Wales and how that organisation can potentially help the human factors domain. And those of you who are watching on YouTube or whatever will notice that Rosie's now moving, which is great to see. So, Rosie, welcome back. And can you give us a bit of an intro then? What is Space Wales, and how does it work with Aerospace Wales? And are you both, is it just a different name for the same organisation? What's the magic?
Yeah, so Space Wales is an arm of Aerospace Wales. So we are one team that work very closely together. But as you might be able to guess, aerospace whales focus on the aerospace side of things, and space whales focus on the space side of things. So we act as the trade association for the space sector across Wales. But because there's such a strong link between aerospace and space here in Wales, particularly with the strong aerospace heritage, there is a lot of overlap in certain areas. So we work really closely together from that. But really, we are an organisation of about 80 companies. And we have got the 9 universities across Wales as well doing space-related research. So our role is to support the organisations, help to promote them, and also work really closely with Welsh Government to deliver the space strategy for Wales that was published a couple of years ago, which is focused on sustainability, which is at the heart of everything that Wales does, is how can we be sustainable about that? But also comes with the challenge of what do you mean by sustainable? From that perspective, space itself isn't always seen as the most sustainable sector. When you think of rocket launches, you think of the amount of space debris that there is. So we're really looking at how we can incorporate the space sector into Wales's industries, and how we can support the sustainability piece from that perspective. So it's a very wide job, but a really interesting job.
So, I mean, for anybody who looks at Wales from the outside, I mean, it's what, 3 million inhabitants in the country. That seems like a very large number of companies involved in space. It's incredible, really, when you look at it. So, what sort of companies are we talking about? Are we are we talking about people who actually launch stuff into space, or are we just talking about companies who make, I don't know, nuts and bolts that might happen to supply them? What does this sector look like?
Yeah, a bit of both, Barry. So we've got what you might call traditional space companies, which are those who manufacture satellites or parts for satellites, or develop propulsion systems for launch, or launch sites themselves. And then we've got the people that use downstream applications from space, who might not necessarily think of themselves as a space company until we introduce them to the wider perspective of the satellite communications, thinking about looking at things like farming and agriculture using Earth observation data from satellites, and linking those companies in to be able to support other organisations across the space sector as well. So it's a very wide range of what different organisations are doing. I've actually had the task of trying to map out some of the different sectors that we cross into here in the space sector. And that involves, as kind of the agriculture side of things, it involves fintech, involves cybersecurity, as well as the kind of traditional manufacturing of components as well. So it's really interesting how diverse the space sector is here in Wales.
So you must have a few of them conversations then, where you're talking to a random company and said, "Do you know that there is that you could have an ability to exploit space here?" How does that sort of conversation go?
It normally starts quite awkwardly because you introduce space to them and they are just like, "What? Why would I consider that?" So an example is we've been working on a project in collaboration with the East Anglia and Northern Ireland space clusters, looking at how space can support harmful algal blooms and issues around those, and also issues around seaweed production and farming. And going to a food and drink company and saying, "Hey, we've got a space project we think we might be able to help with," they are just like, "What does that have to do with us?" But once you get into the conversation of the overlap areas and how kind of mainly satellite technology, but other areas of space as well can support with that, it turns into a really interesting conversation, because I think most people are interested in space deep down, even if they don't immediately jump at the opportunity to work with space. So it does always turn into quite an interesting discussion about how that overlap with space might be able to support an organisation that isn't traditionally in the space sector, but could find opportunities to be able to benefit from either the network of organisations, but quite often the funding opportunities that are available to do with space as well.
So the number of questions coming off that. I guess some people who, when they think of trade organizations, will be thinking of, you go to trade shows and there's lots of wine, there's lots of socializing. But for you to make these sort of almost obscure connections, that's got to be that there's an awful lot of background work presumably going into that to make sure. Do you not feel hard done by that? Perhaps you have to work harder than most to make it work.
I think because space is such a fast moving and fast paced sector, it's part of the involvement with space is that things are always changing, things are always moving. There's always more you can do to be able to support with that. And there's definitely opportunities to do those kind of events and networking as part of that. I think I've had my fair share of Welsh whiskey and cheese receptions at events. So it's nice to be able to use kind of going to those events to be able to help with these connections as well and bring things forward.
So you mentioned that there's funding opportunities. Is it a well-funded sector? Is there funding opportunities available for people to tap into?
So at the moment, there's quite a lot of accelerator programs for early stage businesses for supporting the space sector, most of which come out of the UK Space Agency. The European Space Agency also have funding opportunities. So I work very closely with Grant Day, who is the European Space Agency UK Business Applications Ambassador for the southwest of England and Wales.
That's a title.
Yes. And part of his work is to look at where space kind of ties into other sectors as well on the downstream side of things. So I have the support of people like that in the role and the kind of way to share funding opportunities that are relevant to other sectors from that as well. So there is funding available for quite specific areas that tie into either the UK National Space Strategy and Space Industrial Plan and kind of the European Space Agency's ambitions as well. They are the two main funding sources.
So you mentioned the UK space strategy there. How does what we're doing in Wales, look, I use the big we, how does it with what we're doing in Wales fit into sort of the UK global ambitions?
Yeah, so we're supporting one of the key areas around launch. So we've got Snowdonia Space Centre in Llanbedr, where there's currently developments to create a space technology test centre that supports the development of technology across the UK to get it ready for the launch environment, because a lot of technology, that's where it is right now. It needs that verification and validation opportunity. And then be able to access a near space environment, which is the aim for the site to be able to do that. So from the launch perspective, we're supporting from a sustainability perspective. A lot of the focus is around active debris removal, but we're also looking at how the capabilities here in Wales can support from a space observation perspective with some of the universities that are working in that area, some of the organisations as well. Manufacturing as well. So looking at how manufacturing and advanced materials in the space sector, we can become a leader in the UK in that area. And there are organisations in Wales that are doing a fantastic job in innovative ways of being able to manufacture. So that's either materials for spacecraft or being able to manufacture materials in space itself. So there's quite a few areas of overlap. It's a very big strategy document, so I'm not going to go through all of them right now. But there definitely are areas of overlap between the work going on in Wales and the overall UK space strategy.
Cool. And yes, what I'll do in the notes, I'll post a link to that strategy document because it is well worth a read if you're into the sector. This is a Human Factors podcast, and to sort of put you on the spot a little bit, I guess, how do you think Human Factors and Ergonomics fits into the space domain at the moment?
Yeah, I think it is a key part of thinking about the launch environment, thinking about satellite operations, thinking about how that is done in a way that is, well, linking it back to sustainability, that is sustainable. Is it something that means people can use it and it will continue to be able to be used effectively and efficiently and to the needs of the people that are operating in that environment? But also the downstream side of things, you end up with heaps of data from satellites that end up somewhere in a repository and could never be seen again because nobody actually knows how to go through that and actually pick out the data from that. So it's really important from that side of things to have this accessibility to data in a way that people are able to use it and can take it forward, which the European Space Agency have been doing a brilliant job of with some of the Copernicus data and having that available. So it fits into quite a lot of different areas, and even the communication of spreading the word that we have a space sector here in Wales. How can we do that in a digestible way that isn't just going to be lots of words that nobody is ever going to read? We want to make it kind of accessible format for people as well.
So bags of opportunities for anybody who wants to get involved in human factors. Come to Wales. We can do lots of it once we work out what the in looks like. So with a lot of the project, I mean, you've already highlighted the fact you've been able to talk to a wide variety of companies and that sort of stuff. What's the coolest thing you've seen so far?
So the coolest thing I've seen is the development, I would say, of Snowdonia Space Centre. So the site itself now has a test stand for rocket engines.
Cool.
It has a launch rail in place for launches. It has this Space Technology Test Centre in development. But there are so many opportunities at that site for more development. So the company Snowdonia Aerospace that run the site are really interested in tourism for the area around Llanbedr. So what could be done around there, and the potential of a observatory and visitor centre at the site, and just the conversations that spark from that site and how well that links into the space sector, but so many other sectors in Wales as well. It just always leaves me with a wow as I'm leaving the site, well, as I'm getting there as well, but leaving the site knowing of all these opportunities and things that we can help to support.
I mean, there's got to be something there about it's actually a physical thing that you can point at and go, look, this is because a lot of the work that other companies do, such as ourselves, it's very there's not necessarily physical things here. You're doing reports, you're doing all that sort of stuff, but to have a physical location that you can go, hey, look at this, that's got to make such a difference.
Absolutely.
So we talked a lot about what's here and now, what the sort of things you're getting up to. What do you see the future ambitions of the space sector in Wales to be?
Continuing to grow, definitely. So we want to. So at the moment, we are looking at how we take the space strategy for Wales forward, and how we can do that in a way that's going to benefit the organisations across Wales, knowing how they fit into different sectors, such as high value manufacturing. As part of that. So I think a key part is collaboration with other sectors across Wales and continuing those conversations and the links, but also keeping the sustainability piece at the heart of everything that we're doing as well. Because in saying sustainability, I mentioned before, it's very hard to define sustainability. We're looking at how, in terms of the different split between the sector, if that's space operations, space manufacturing, launch, if that's downstream applications of space data, how do we then tie that into the wider economy? How do we tie that into the skills that are needed? Make sure that the education opportunities are supported where they can be. And of course, sustainable in terms of the environmental impact. But all of that together really help create a sector that will continue and grow. So it's kind of keeping all of that together to keep the sector on an upward trajectory. I won't make a launch pun.
I was going to say that there has to be some sort of joke in there about that. But it certainly sounds with that sort of ambition and where you're at, you're certainly going to have your hands full over the next however many years, because it could go off into so many different directions. How do you almost keep your head straight in terms of keeping strategically going in the right direction?
Yes, this is where the space strategy for Wales is really helpful, because it really helps us align with Welsh Government's ambitions and how we can help them deliver areas of that strategy. So by keeping an eye on what all of the different organisations across Wales are doing and keeping in mind the strategy objectives and how they could be achieved, it's really merging those two together as the focus points for the activities that we'll do.
So I guess last question in this bit then, I guess, you talked a lot about how you talk to the companies, but you've mentioned the way that you talk to the Welsh Government as well. How often do you talk to them? How do them sort of conversations go? Do they just sort of keep going, or just keep doing what you're doing? Or are they really, I guess, actively involved in what you're doing?
Yeah, they're very actively involved in what we're doing. So the team under the high value manufacturing sector of Welsh Government are very actively involved in the things that we're doing, and that's support for attending events, but also support in general in terms of the activities that we're doing and engagement in general. And we are trying to engage more with other areas of the Welsh Government as well in terms of the downstream side of things and linking into climate, linking into the environmental aspects as well. And we are also supported by the innovation team as well in Welsh Government. So we spoke on funding opportunities before. I forgot to mention that innovation funding in Welsh Government supports quite a lot of organisations across Wales, some of which are in the aerospace and space sector. So although it's not specific space funding, there are opportunities for support from Welsh Government as well.
So it does really sound like you've got, your bag in that middle, or perhaps a part of that triangle that brings all of that together. No, that's amazing. Right, we're going to take another quick break, and then we'll get into the final three.
It's to the final three. My name's Nick Rome. Let me tell you about this. Technology in our world is evolving at a phenomenal pace, and keeping up with what that means in the human factors world can be challenging. That's where Human Factors Cast comes in. Human Factors Cast is a weekly podcast that highlights and breaks down stories that are chosen by you, the Human Factors community.
New York State is giving out hundreds of robots as companions for the elderly.
Buttons in cars are safer and quicker to use than touchscreen.
A prototype just achieved a major milestone that actually fits the description of a flying car.
The show provides perspective based on experiences from different domains and different industries. We even cover some of the hottest conferences in the field. On this episode, we're recapping EHF, Ergonomics and Human Factors Conference, Neuroergonomics Conference, Human Factors and Ergonomics Society, UXPA International. Join me, Nick Rome.
And me, Barry Kirby.
Every Friday morning when Human Factors Cast drops on YouTube and your favorite podcast directory. And remember,
it depends.
And now I'm going to send it back over to Barry for the final three.
And welcome back. So, Rosie, these final three questions are ones that we ask everybody who comes on board. So, start with the first one. What do you have a go-to book or a paper that is just like it's always on your desk, you're always referring to it, and is almost like a Bible for what you're doing?
Yes, as mentioned before, and this isn't the most interesting response to this, but it is the Space Strategy for Wales, to the extent that my internet browser does almost always suggest that is the thing that I open when I go to do things on the internet. So that is one of the main things that I refer to and have multiple copies of, because it is so important to the things that we're doing and making sure that we're achieving all of those objectives. And I'd recommend a read as well to anyone watching.
So I shall go and get my copy out. I've got to admit, I haven't thumbed it for a while, so I'll get back into it. If you could go back to a younger age, whatever age suits you, what advice would you give your younger self?
I think my advice would be around resilience, that kind of things can be achieved through hard work, regardless of what other people tell you. So for an example, my maths teacher at A level told me that I wasn't going to pass because I got a B at GCSE and everyone else in the class had got an A. And at that point, I kind of gave up. I actually sat and learnt pi, which was around the top of the classroom, to 45 decimal places during those lessons because I wasn't getting any support from that teacher, which is now my fun party trick.
I was going to say, you're now the person for a pub quiz.
Yes. But it's just kind of that advice to keep going through those things. There'll be people that tell you no and you can't do these things. And as long as you believe in yourself and you can, there's so much you can achieve. I got into university for my undergraduate degree through clearing. Now I've got a PhD from the University of Edinburgh. So there's so much you can do with hard work and just keeping your mind to it and keeping that positivity around it.
Awesome. So how many decimal places can you recite pi to now? I won't ask you to do it, but can you still do the 45? Or you?
I think so. Shall I try it?
Go on then.
3.1441. Oh no. 3.141592653589793238462264333832795028
Wow. That has to be a podcast first on anywhere. I'll take that. So that's getting clipped for you for TikTok, I tell you. Go forward massive number of years, you decide that enough's enough, you're going to retire. What do you like to be remembered for?
I think I would like to be remembered for creating a very collaborative and positive environment, be that the space sector in Wales, but in general, having that. It's all well and good having a sector kind of created and you can't approach it, or there's no kind of happy front door for people to be able to engage with as part of that, to be able to support them. So I think positivity and encouragement would be the things I'd like to be remembered for.
Awesome. Now, Rosie, thank you ever so much for your time with us today. It's really good to get that sort of insight into a sector and knowing, not only from a human factors perspective, but if you're going from any sector, knowing that the space sector is open to you on a number of different areas, whether you want to get involved with it itself or use some of them downstream applications. It's really nice to get that insight and knowing it's so approachable. If people do want to get in touch with you to know how to do more with this, how would they go about doing that?
Yep. So I do have a LinkedIn page, so feel free to reach out to me from there. My email address is on my LinkedIn page. I won't recite it now. So if you'd like to reach out by email as well, please do that via there, and I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. And Rosie's details will be in the guest details of this episode too. So again, thank you, Rosie. Really appreciate it. Thank you all for listening and watching. Wherever you're consuming this, be it on video through YouTube or through the shorts, or if you're listening through audio, please comment, like and share. The way that you share stuff is the way that we grow our audience. So your recommendations are more valuable than anything else. So do leave us a review. If you've got questions that you want to pop in the comments here, do pop them in. They will get highlighted to me, and we will do what we can to get an answer as well. So, but for now, thank you all, and we shall see you on the next episode.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for listening to 1202, the Human Factors Podcast. Please do get in touch with your thoughts, questions, and comments. You can contact us on social media such as Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook at 1202 Podcast. See you next time. And remember, it's more than just common sense.